Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. An influential Republican group plans to spend big bucks to help the GOP keep North Carolina's open U.S. Senate seat. The Senate Leadership Fund says it plans to spend at least $71 million to help Michael Whatley beat Democrat Roy Cooper in November. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran joins us now to break down the broader Republican effort to keep Senate seats across the nation. We're recording this on Monday, April 6th. Will, good to see you again.
You too, Jack.
Will, the Senate Leadership Fund said this week it plans to spend $71 million to support Republican Michael Whatley's U.S. Senate race. Who's behind the money, and what are their plans?
Yeah, this is big money. It is the PAC that is backed by GOP leadership up in D.C. This is John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader. This is his super PAC that he's got. And if you look into who's been giving to it, it's, Elon Musk, Paul Singer, Stephen Wynn. Basically, if you can think of a billionaire in tech or finance, there's probably a pretty good chance that they've given at least a few $1 million to this PAC. So big money. They actually announced, I think it was $342 million nationwide for 8 key states. But North Carolina was actually the second largest of those 8 with this $70 million buy behind Ohio, which is also going to be a pretty competitive race as well.
So why so much money in North Carolina? And put that number into perspective for us.
Yeah, $71 million. I mean, that is not pocket change, right? And actually, if you look back in history, North Carolina back in 2014, when Thom Tillis won his first race for U.S. Senate and defeated Kay Hagan, both Tillis and Hagan and all of the outside groups combined to spend $100 million. And that set a new record for the entire nation when they did that. And, this is barely over a decade ago, 12 years ago. And so now we have just one group saying it's going to spend $71 million. I mean, just the amount of money in our politics has gotten just staggering, and it's going up and up every single year. And this is just another example of just the big money that it takes to stay competitive in a state like North Carolina, where really either side in just about any election can always have a decent chance of winning.
And it's not just a lot of ads they need to buy. They have to buy those ads in a lot of places, right?
That's right. They're going to be, well, first of all, hiring people on the ground to go door knocking. But in terms of TV ads, yeah, that's going to be the main spending. But it's not, you can't just spend money in Raleigh and in Charlotte and reach people. That'll get you to about 30% of the state's population. But, we are a really spread out, pretty rural state. And so you've got to also buy ads in all these different media markets all across the state, in Elizabeth City, in Greenville, in Wilmington, out in Asheville, in Greensboro, the Triad area. We have tons of different media markets. So, if you want to reach a household with your ad, you don't just buy that ad on a couple of stations. You have to buy it on 10 or 20 stations.
What are the Democrats doing in terms of fundraising? Are they mounting a counteroffense?
They are. I spoke to kind of the counterpoint group that's associated with Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat, and they also are going to be spending millions of dollars. They said that they have not yet settled on a final figure, so I can't tell you if it's going to be more or less than this $71 million that John Thune is putting behind Whatley, but they're going to be playing in this race. It's still really early. And in fact, it is pretty rare to get the numbers this early. And the Democrats' response is basically that, well, this just shows that the Republicans are desperate. And the fact that they're rolling this out so early shows how worried they are about losing this race here in North Carolina.
Now, Democratic nominee Roy Cooper has a long track record in office. That gives him a lot to point to, but it also gives Whatley and the Republicans a lot of ammunition, right? What do you expect the ads on the Republican side to focus on?
It's going to be a lot about public safety and crime. We saw Donald Trump in his State of the Union address talk about Irina Zarutska, the young woman who was murdered in Charlotte. Whatley has been trying really hard to tie that case to Cooper, other public safety issues to Cooper, especially around COVID, era policies, things like that. Cooper led a racial justice task force when he was governor, which Republicans are now really, glomming onto and trying to make that into a campaign issue as well. So they're going to be talking about that. They're going to be talking potentially about some disaster response under Cooper to Hurricanes Florence and Matthew and the state's slow response to those. But that's going to be a little tricky for Whatley to thread that needle because Trump also made him the recovery czar for Hurricane Helene. And we've reported that recovery has also gone very slowly under President Donald Trump. So it's going to be hard for Whatley to say, Cooper did a bad job without Cooper turning around and saying, well, let's look at your own track record. So, I think we're going to get a lot of that in this race. lots of money means probably a lot of attack ads, lots and lots of negative messaging coming to your airwaves this summer.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear what early polls say about North Carolina's U.S. Senate race. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the race for North Carolina's open U.S. Senate seat. Will, the Senate Leadership Fund's commitment comes less than a week after two new polls on the race. What did the polls show?
Yeah, the first was a Catawba poll that showed a big double-digit lead for Roy Cooper, 14 points, and that included some kind of lean voters who might still be a little undecided. So, a little squishy on the numbers there exactly, but any way you slice that, I mean, that is a huge, huge lead for Cooper. Will the race end up that far apart? Who knows? Hard to say. Probably not. But what we also saw, interesting poll from Elon University. It didn't poll them head to head. Instead, it just said, hey, do you know who this person is? And if you do, what's your opinion on them? And that showed that, one, Cooper is way more well-known than Michael Whatley is. And two, Cooper's also much more popular than Michael Whatley is. There's still a few people who haven't made up their minds on Cooper. It's actually close to 20% of the people they polled, which was frankly stunning for someone who served 2 terms as governor, has been in state politics for 30 years, and, a fifth of the people responding to this poll said, I don't really know enough about that guy to have an opinion. But that probably also just goes to show how fast the state is growing. Of course, there's always people who don't really pay attention to politics, but we also just have so many new residents who've moved here in the last couple of years. Cooper is going to have to convince those people, that he is worthy of their attention too. But it also found that, Michael Whatley still has a lot to do. The majority of people didn't know who he was, and the people who did know who he was overall had a net unpopular, unfavorable view of him. So he's got some work to do. But, the good news for him, even though he does have, kind of some unpopularity among people who know him, again, most people don't know who he is. So he can make up that ground, and, this money could help him and, get his name, his face, his message out there to the people who don't know him and introduce him to the folks in North Carolina.
Now, we caught up with Whatley last week at an event in Cary after these polls came out, and we asked him about it, and he acknowledged he's got some work to do when it comes to name recognition. We actually have that clip here. Check it out.
The fact is he does have name recognition that's associated with being elected into office for 38 years, right? I've never run for office, so my name recognition is a little bit lower. But whenever we have the conversations with people across this state, we are getting our points through.
Will, what does that tell you?
Well, I mean, it shows that he's being realistic. He knows that, he does have this challenge, but it's also something that he thinks he can overcome and he can get there. And, there's still a lot of time left before November.
It doesn't seem like Cooper is resting on his laurels and taking these numbers for granted, right?
No. His campaign, especially that 14-point lead said, we, do not, we're not acting like we have a 14-point lead right now. We are taking this very seriously. We're, treating this like it is a close race because, you look at every recent federal election in North Carolina, whether that's for president, U.S. Senate, I mean, there's no such thing as a 14-point race here. It always seems like it comes down to just a couple of percentage points. When, Trump won the state in 2024, it was his, biggest margin of victory ever, and he barely got 50% of the vote here. We're a very close state and, with a history of electing Republicans. So Cooper knows that he's got his work cut out for him as well.
Going to be a very, very busy 7 months. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. For his reporting on North Carolina's U.S. Senate race, visit the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.